Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur from Dubai, UAE, Mr. Samuel Joy. Samuel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Samuel is the founder and chief executive officer of Huntr, which is a migrant worker marketplace that revolutionizes how enterprises source, manage, and onboard their blue-collar workforce. So, Samuel, tell me a little bit about your journey and what was the inspiration to create Huntr?
Sure, Mr. Ashutosh. So I would start with probably my career working for the Emirates Group, and specifically, they have a company called TransGuard. To the world, everybody knows Emirates as the Emirates Airlines, but Emirates is a much larger company. And so TransGuard is their manpower division, which started by supporting the airline industry and then moved on to different other industries as well because it was such a successful model. And so I had the pleasure of working for the Emirates Group, especially in their manpower division, and firsthand saw of how the blue collar workers were being hired, and how the technology systems interacted, especially with the blue collar industry. And so that's where the idea sparked. And I had the opportunity at that point of time to kind of speak about it to the managing director. In fact, they wanted it to be Emirates product, but I had my brother-in-law who spoke wisdom into me and mentioned that I need to quit and start Huntr on my own. And so I did. And he was the first angel investor who invested in us. And now he's my partner. He's very excited in terms of how it has developed to be and the impact that it has to the world. And so he's become my partner as well.
Mm.
And so yeah, that's typically how the journey started. And so initially we did a lot of things manually actually, to kind of map out the entire process of how it works. So we started a marketplace,
Mhm.
which is what you had described Huntr as, and that was our initial step. And we went about aggregating large enterprises from a demand perspective. And then we in fact started off as a two-sided marketplace where initially we connected candidates directly with enterprises. And we realized when it comes to high volume recruitment,
Mm.
the direct marketplace didn't really work out. And so we created a three-sided marketplace where we have service providers, where we aggregate large institutions like training organization, government agencies, recruitment agencies, and who have access to large volume of blue collar workers. And so we created a marketplace, and then it naturally evolved into a SaaS. And now we see a large future in a data analytics software because we have access to a lot of blue collar workers and their data, as well as a lot of institutions which have access to the blue collar workers, and also large enterprises who have very high volume of recruitment needs.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, what can you talk to me a little bit about the process of how Huntr sources, manages, and onboards blue collar workers?
Yeah, sure. I can give you details about that, which is we start from a demand side, and from a demand side, we aggregate large enterprises that have high volume blue collar recruitment.
Mhm.
And typically, these are large enterprises which have 5,000 or 10,000 plus employees, all the way to 100,000 plus blue collar employees. And they typically recruit at least 300 to 500 on a monthly basis. And so it's a very different to sourcing through Indeed or Monster or Naukri for one-off jobs. I'm talking about batch volume hiring.
Mm.
And so on the supply side, we partner with, as I mentioned, training organization, government institutions, and recruitment agencies, and we empower them with technology. So what happens is they pre-register the candidates on our platform, and the platform automatically shortlists the best profiles so
Mm.
that the interviews happen on the platform. The language test, the aptitude test, and any other test also happen on the platform.
Mm.
And the ones who are shortlisted, they go to the next stage, which is the onboarding process. So their
Mhm.
documentation, starting with their passport and photo, all the way to medical, police clearance certificate, other documentation, all are collected
Mm.
via the platform. And so the offer letters, the visa, the tickets are all issued again through the platform. to ensure there is transparency in the process.
Right.
And because all of this data flows through our platform, we have a good view of what that pipeline looks like.
Mhm.
And so does the enterprise, so does the service provider. So everybody's on the same page, and we are all aligned together. And also there is timelines set for each of the stages as a result as well.
Well said. Well said. And Samuel, what are some of the biggest challenges a lot of the industry faces when it comes to hiring blue collar workers? And how do you at Huntr address these challenges?
Yeah, so there are multiple problems to solve in this industry, and we are currently focused on the pre-hiring piece, as there are players focusing on the post-hiring solutions, such as leave management, attendance, upskilling, payroll. In fact, we have strategic partners who manages the post-hiring space. But the burning need for any large enterprise starts actually with the pre-hiring, and so that is a blue ocean space, I would say. And I would also say that pre-hiring starts with a strategy and a plan. And for this, data plays a huge role. And so by aggregating players such as large institutions all across the globe, especially in Asia and Africa, we can estimate what the pipeline of supply for each of the category from each country to each state to each villages, because we have tied up with multiple service providers all across the different countries. And without this information, the challenge would be to be reactive in nature. And so, like, natural tendency is to be reactive in nature. And so that means what that means is relying on legacy hiring systems to come up with necessary candidates in such a short period of time. And so typically that means recruitment agencies and their network of brokers. And so they really don't have the power of data and technology, and it's such a very old school legacy system which is being used, which results in shortages of manpower, delay in deploying candidates, and also getting the wrong people for the job. So I would say lack of strategy and planning ends up in reactive nature, which is relying on legacy hiring systems, which ends up getting the wrong people, not filling the job positions, delay in deployment, and high attrition rates. And finally, also enabling exploitation through the process as well.
Great response. Thank you. And Samuel, how do you differentiate Huntr from a lot of other platforms in the space that you're operating in?
Sure. So we actually deploy technology to all our players, as I mentioned, including the enterprise, to the service providers, to the candidates. So there's a smooth flow of workforce through the pipelines created, which means that the entire process, all the way from the beginning, from the planning stage to the deployment stage, most of the process are automated.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very different to, I would say, other platforms, because the other platforms out there, you have job boards, which is it has a very specific function, which is they have jobs which are listed, and then companies post jobs and candidates apply for these jobs. And then if the company has an ATS, which typically it's usually for white collar recruitment, if they do have a ATS for blue collar, then they have to connect the ATS to those leads and then track from there. But here, the entire process from the start to the end is one platform. So all the way from posting the job to collecting, or like even before posting the job, forecasting what that supply pipeline looks like, and then creating that plan, and then posting the job, interviewing, shortlisting, getting those documentation, issuing offer letters, issuing visas, and then also tracking where each of the stages are. All of them happens through our platform. So it's not just a job board like Indeed or a Monster or a Naukri, but it's not also an ATS as well, and it's not a recruitment agency as well. So that's how we differentiate ourselves.
Well said. My next question is that what measures does Huntr take to ensure the welfare and rights of a lot of the migrant workers?
Yeah, so on the marketplace perspective, we have both demand and the supply side. So on the demand side, we vet companies that we want to work with. We typically actually work with large enterprises, and that's our strategy always been to work with the large enterprises. And so the large enterprises, we vet them, which means that they don't have inappropriate deductions, they don't have delays in payment. There is proper facilities, and they follow the rules and regulations of embassies of
Mm,
different countries when it comes to minimum salaries, when it comes to overtime, when it comes to transportation, food, accommodation, all those
mm,
details. And we do the same process for the service providers as well. So for the service providers, we look at what their network is in terms of bringing those candidates. Are they using brokers, or are they using social media ads and TVs and radios to bring their people? And to check on this also, we also do random sampling of batches which are being hired. So let's say if it's a batch of 100, we do a random sampling of 10 to 15 people,
mm,
and see if there are problems. And if there are problems, these problems are addressed with the enterprises and the service providers both.
mm. Well said. There is another question that I thought I'd raise with you. Uh, do you see any exploitative hiring practices? And if yes, how do you help workers through your platform?
Yeah, so a good question. We do see exploitative hiring practices. I mean, we have seen, I would say, two sides of it, where one side is fake jobs being offered, where we have seen people coming into the country with a fake offer letter and on a visit visa, and they
Right.
get stuck at the airport, and the airport wouldn't let them pass through because they don't have the necessary documentations
Hmm.
to get access into the country, and they get stuck. And so we have actually helped the people who have been stuck in the airport, especially. And so what happens is they usually get connected to their embassies, and the embassies have, a lot of these candidates who are stuck
Hmm.
in UAE looking for a job. And so we are also connected with the different embassies. And so we also have, again, the people who with the different particular skill set who are in the country, but they are being duped by these brokers, and they have very limited time to be in the country, and because before that they have to leave.
Right.
And so we help them with the local placement opportunities, the one-off jobs, especially. And because again, we have that data from the embassies, and on the other side, we have the relationships with the large enterprises, and so
Hmm.
we're able to place them in positions. And so that is one type of I would say one type of exploitation, which is fake jobs.
Hmm.
And especially that's also a process of how human trafficking happens as well.
Hmm.
And then secondly, there are also exploitative hiring practices when it comes to the actual job which is being offered by, like, the company. And then there are recruitment agencies which manipulate the candidates into saying that it's a different type of a job, or they're not very transparent about what the working conditions are, or what the salaries are, or what the benefits are, and all of those. And so they manipulate them, and then when they come into the country and when they start working, they realize that this is not the terms which I agreed on. And so then there is a expectations not matching reality scenario. And so for us, that is very important. And so we really look into, like, we look every enterprise which we look into their offer letter. We always collect a sample offer letter, look at what those conditions are, and that is being translated to the service providers, and the service providers properly brief the candidates in terms of what that looks like. And they have given a complete briefing about from the start to the end, about, and any explanation about what they're getting into. Only after they agree, they
Hmm.
come into the country. And so there's a proper, and also, by the way, while they're going through their visa process, there is a pre-orientation, departure, and training which happens as well. There are training materials which the client provides beforehand, and so then they are also given a brief training and orientation before they come into the country, so then they know what to expect. And so There's a proper briefing of the job, of the benefits and the salary and the working hours. All of those details are properly briefed back in the home country before they come into the country.
Hmm.
Unlike, typical like exploited hiring practices where agencies or people or brokers are basically manipulating people of
Correct.
the job which they have been hired for.
Correct. Well said. And how many countries are you working in with so many people coming from so many different countries into the UAE?
Oh wow. Yeah, good question. Actually, it's good to keep account of it, but there's, I would say, two different continents, which
Hmm.
is Asia and Africa altogether. And in terms of countries from Asia, we do India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam. And so I would say these are the probably
Hmm.
main countries, Pakistan as well. And then from Africa, we have service providers in Ghana, Malawi, Sierra Leone, Uganda,
Wow.
Kenya, and yeah, but I'm probably missing some, but I would say
Sure.
these are
What
it's.
what an amazing organization you've created in two different continents. Thank you. My next question is that you did mention when we started talking that you are now building this into a SaaS platform. But can you give me an example of how you're using technology to support Hunter's operations and services?
Yeah, sure. So actually, when we started, as I mentioned, we started as a marketplace, and then what happened is we realized that a lot of the companies, the large enterprises, some of them actually use Excel sheets to
Hmm.
manage and track a lot of the where the candidates are at, their
Hmm.
documentation especially, and the stages which they are at. All of those things are tracked through Excel sheets. Or some of the companies use SAP and Oracle, but SAP and Oracle is again very I would say I mean it doesn't go into the details of all of these operational elements when it comes to the first generational tools. And so we then decided, why don't we create our own platform, because we know exactly what the companies, what the enterprise needs, and what the service provider needs, as well as what the candidate needs. And so then again, we went to the drawing board and created the SaaS platform, which takes care of the entire onboarding process, starting from when they've been recruited all the way to them joining and onboarding. And then we realized we can track all the stages, we have all the data flowing in, and so we can create what that like a funnel from when they've been recruited all the way to when they join, and we can display that report to companies and to service providers as well, and also to candidates in which stage they are in.
Hmm.
And so because we have all had this data flowing in, and then we started collecting all this data from service providers, especially, and from a supply side, especially. And then we realized that, oh, wow, okay, we can now create actually pipelines
Hmm.
beforehand, because we have all this data of different jobs, different people, different cities, different villages, different countries, and we know exactly the timelines on when the people can reach from each of these places, and what are the different, there are concentration of certain type of people in certain areas. For example, let's say if it's drivers and heavy duty drivers, they're mostly in Punjab. Or if it's light vehicle drivers, they're mostly in Kerala. If it's nurses, it's Kerala and Philippines.
Hmm.
And if it's carpenters, you have in Rajasthan. And if you want masons, and so there are these pockets of people all across India. And in Nepal, for example, when you look at hospitality, everyone thinks Kathmandu, and Kathmandu is a great place to
Hmm.
find hospitality staff, but also Japa has a concentration of hospitality institutions. And so there is a great success in terms of getting people from Japa. And so we realized that we have all this data and information, and then we then started creating a data analytics platform, which means that we can create a supply pipeline, or forecast what that supply pipeline looks like from each of these country.
Hmm.
And then we went on to create a demand forecasting, because we realized also there's so many geopolitical situations which kind of uh, creates demand or creates shortages of demand as well. Like, for example, countries pulling away from China for manufacturing, and then Abu Dhabi investing $120 billion into manufacturing has created a lot of job opportunities in skilled and manufacturing sector in the UAE especially. And so we realized that scraping like research websites, competitor websites, and just different information out there from a demand, and especially geopolitical situations really help us in forecasting what that demand looks like. And then
Right.
we can pre-plan with technology and create pipelines based on that. So yeah, that's how the evolution began.
Absolutely.
It
What a
started with
great
the
response.
marketplace to SaaS to a
Yeah.
data analytics
What a
platform.
great
Yeah.
response. Thank you. Samuel, I have time for two more questions. My next question is, what trends do you see in the migrant worker marketplace or your platform?
Yes, interesting question. I think one of the trend which I've seen is what I mentioned earlier, which is on the skilled workforce. So when we started out during the COVID time, and that point of time, it was only the healthcare which was being recruited, and there was a very high volume of healthcare workers demand. And then it moved, and when the market opened up, just generally, there
Hmm.
was a big demand for unskilled
Hmm.
labor because of construction projects. And you would see, for example, with Saudi Arabia, $1 trillion which has gone into the infrastructure, which means there's a lot of construction projects which has come up. And then we've seen how that evolved from unskilled labor to skilled labor,
Hmm.
specifically like electricians, plumbers, masons, carpenters, and supervisors. And also, we have now been seeing trends where there is a mix of skilled workers with technology expertise and specific technology expertise as well. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Abu Dhabi invested $120 billion, or sorry, 120 billion dirhams into UAE. And as a result, the manufacturing sector of UAE has become much stronger. And there's such a lot of requirements for skilled workers in the manufacturing sector. And in the same is with, UAE has invested quite a lot of money into agri-tech as well. So farmers is another trend which we've been seeing.
Yep.
And again, farmers with technology expertise. We've also been seeing there is the leadership has a couple of initiatives on women empowerment, especially in the skills sector. And so we are seeing a lot of roles with like which were mainly male dominated roles, like construction, for example.
Mhm.
And that is being the females are being more demanded now in those some of these sectors. And so that's another trend which we have been seeing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I would say these are probably the most amount, and then generally like there has been the constant amount of or I would say not constant, but the some of the trends which have always been the case is like for healthcare workers, the nurses, and the female nurses especially. Hospitality has always been increasing all from years before as well, and it's the
Mhm.
same. It's always been increasing because of the infrastructure investments and so on and so forth. But I would probably name the three, such as the skill requirements, the female requirements, and the agri-tech workers, which are the the emerging trends which we're seeing.
Amazing. Samuel, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. I mean, I'm so fascinated with the way you have created Huntr to support such a large number of migrant workers that are not only going to the UAE, but probably coming into the entire Middle East. And I'm sure this kind of migrations will be happening all over the world. And I see Huntr probably growing all over the world as a global platform to be able to support migrant workers. Thank you for taking me through so many different aspects of how Huntr addresses and supports not just the migrant workers, but the employers as well. Thank you for
Thank
speaking
you.
to me and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.